Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Wednesday, January 21st. So as you probably know, all eyes are on Davos, the Swiss site of the World Economic Forum, where this afternoon, European time, Trump will give his presentation to that forum. And what I'm going to focus on is contrasting the Davos worldview to the what Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, just reminded us of the formation of the Russia-India-China strategic triangle as the foundation for BRICS. And really those two worldviews are at what is at loggerheads presently and defining the strategic showdown in all matters of military conflict, economics, and so on. And I would just remind you all that Lyndon LaRouche was at the center of those dialogues in the formation of the Russia-India-China strategic triangle put together by Primakov at the time and his collaborators in the other nations. And LaRouche's idea was to use that concept eventually to bring the United States into that formation and what he called the four powers, based on a new his principles of his science of physical economy, to use the advancement of science and technology to drive the global economy and to create a new system in the alternative to the City of London and Wall Street. So that defines the present global landscape. But concerning what's going on in Davos, I'll cite a report by Politico, which reported on the organizing efforts of its current CEO, Borge Brenda, probably pronouncing that wrong, where he recounts his organizing drive around the White House. In other words, going in, he had discussions with Susie Wiles as he discussed it. He talked about 5 cabinet secretaries that will be at Davos, saying that there will be a broad footprint of the U.S. in Davos. Now, as part of this broad footprint of the kind of MAGA orientation of the White House, we'll have the gaggle of the AI hyperscalers, as they call themselves, and so on, the billionaire Silicon Valley execs and so on, Microsoft, Meta, Palantir, Anthropic, OpenAI, and that, of course, will also include the likes of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, Salesforce, others. And in general, it's being characterized that the woke agenda is gone out of fashion. That's according to Mike Rubino, as cited in Politico, former Trump administration official. Now he's at Forward Global and Ballard Partners, saying that the woke agenda that we've seen at the World Economic Forum is going out of fashion. Brenda, the current CEO of the World Economic Forum, replaced Klaus Schwab, who was, of course, the longtime poster child for the globalist agenda of the World Economic Forum. And, in addition to the slew of wars they supported, the economic enslavement of the rest of the global majority, and the collapse of our physical economy, in addition to that, the Klaus Schwab and his associates did promote the so-called woke agenda, which we are now seeing a present backlash against, which, sort of takes the form of, well, if you don't like the, transgender reading sessions for kindergartners, then that means you must support the U.S. military deployment on your streets. That's kind of, it seems to me, the shape of the backlash presently. But I would just add in this context that Schwab and his associates, they're very familiar with these kind of gang counter gang operations. In other words, promote one thing, create a backlash against it, and use the conflict to drive ultimately their own agenda. This is the old British counterinsurgency strategy that they used to manage their lost colonies post World War II. Anyway, that's a story for another day. But now I just want to contrast the present orientation, certainly that we have within the Trump administration, and the longtime pursuits of the likes of BlackRock and Larry Fink and so on. Recall that in 2020, Trump gave this quite significant speech, at least it was read so at the time, where he basically said that this whole globalist agenda has failed and we need to look to the future as the great builders of the past did. He said that to embrace, this is again Trump in 2020 at the Davos summit, he says, but to embrace the possibilities of tomorrow, we must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse. They are the heirs of yesterday's foolish fortune tellers. And he goes on to talk about the overpopulation crisis in the 60s, mass starvation in the 70s, end of oil in the 90s. He said then, these alarmists always demand the same thing, absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives. So assumedly Trump was talking about rejecting that, but unfortunately what we've seen is that. Now what he also did is he referred to the Duomo of Florence. This is the great structure in Florence, Italy, that was really the forum of the Renaissance and one of the great projects that initiated what science and technology could do. He also referred to the construction of Notre Dame as part of the cathedralist movement that led up to that. Anyway, it was a very optimistic approach that we saw from Trump in 2020, but what we also saw at that same meeting was the BlackRock gang and Larry Fink and company proposing they had just come off of the regime change policy, as they called it, that they had presented to the Jackson Hole central bankers meeting, blanking on the name of what it's usually referred to, but that the Federal Reserve organizes every year. But anyway, at that meeting, this regime change policy was to have the central banks essentially create a global dictatorship through the digital currencies and so on. This is also at the time that we were seeing the transition to the green agenda in what the likes of now King Charles and his good friend and collaborator Michael Bloomberg were promoting at the time, that we need to shift the trillions of the present bankrupt system into the green agenda. So obviously that form of the Great Reset did not occur, but I think what we're looking at is perhaps the other game plan, which is total economic subjugation under a great power conflict that we're seeing, spheres of influence in these kind of concepts. Certainly that would be behind the grab of Greenland and so on. Now, I will just say that presently Larry Fink of BlackRock is the co-chair of the World Economic Forum. So anyway, we'll have to see what's said today, but I think they're not the likes of Larry Fink and the quadrillions of dollars that are at stake within the present collapsing transatlantic system and the attempts by the asset managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, the big ones there. We know what they want. That is not a shared world of collaboration, but instead the world of subjugation. Now, I would certainly wonder, and Sergei Lavrov, who I'll come to his points in a minute, he starts off by noting the dramatic changes that we've seen in the first days of 2026. That includes the continued war in Ukraine, the assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin, which, initially was denied by CIA, but then said, well, maybe it was just a strike on a military facility close to his residence, at the same time that they were admitting that they've played all kinds of games with Kiev's strikes via drones on other of Russia's assets in the region. That incident against Putin followed on the 2024 attack on the radar facilities of Russia's early warning systems. That, of course, was under Biden, but then under Trump last summer, we had the Operation Spiderweb targeting Russia's strategic bomber fleet. So again, shades of the deep state are all over these operations, but it cannot be ruled out that Trump knew about this, given that we, had earlier the kidnapping of Maduro. We have the Greenland operation, which Trump has made clear, or has recently said that it's regarding his Golden Dome system, which is entirely related to the matter of supremacy and nuclear warfare. Just to note one other aspect, we do have NORAD deploying fighter jets to Greenland, supposedly in coordination with Denmark. So this is all part of those tensions. Other significant tensions are the Pentagon announcing the deployment of military aircraft to the Middle East. I believe it's the Abraham Lincoln that's already on its way there, but the Department of War has begun deploying fighter jets to the Middle East. This is all according to the Wall Street Journal, so beware of your sources, but that's at least, again, according to the Wall Street Journal, as Trump considers weighing the options of striking Iran. There's also additional air defense systems, Patriots and THAADs, that would restore the depleted systems that were hammered by Iran, in the Israeli systems that were hammered by Iran in the last of the conflict, the 12-day war, so-called. Now, the only solution to all of this is to recognize that the transatlantic system is dead and gone. The City of London and Wall Street, which have looted not only the global majority for decades, have destroyed the economies of the United States and Western Europe. And we need to put them through a bankruptcy reorganization. What's legitimate needs to be converted into, in terms of debt, needs to be converted into long-term credit or used as the basis for long-term credit that can be directed into the physical economy, the development of infrastructure and new platforms, ultimately based on fusion, as LaRouche identifies in his 4 laws. Fusion power, which is well on the way in China, where they're already preparing to integrate fusion into the overall physical economy. That we've had reports in EIR on those matters, which would absolutely transform the entire geopolitical and economic landscape of the planet. But the only way to do that is the collaboration with Russia, China, India, and the entire global majority. So I want to actually, before I come to the statements from Lavrov on the RIC, the Russia, India, China thing, I will say there's one good thing that's come out of Davos, which is the meeting between Kirill Dmitriev, the envoy of Russia, that's been meeting with Witkoff and I was going to say Rubio, but not Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. So anyway, those meetings were described as constructive, positive, and we just got word now that the Witkoff will be on his way to Moscow, I believe Kushner as well, to meet with Putin. They're leaving and going to Moscow tomorrow. I assume the meeting will occur tomorrow. Witkoff said that they've asked for the meetings, that is, the Russians have invited us to come, and that's a significant statement from them. So I think everybody is embedded in the process and wants to see a peace deal happen. Now, from the Russian side on that meeting, Peskov confirmed the upcoming visit. He did say that it's important for us to obtain all the information on the discussions between Americans, Europeans, and Ukrainians. So we'll see what happens with that. Will this be just part of the drawn-out negotiation process while covert operations are done against Russia? Real success would be defined by accepting Dmitriev's proposal for the Bering Strait Tunnel, which would integrate the United States into the Eurasian perspective of the World Land Bridge, or the Belt and Road Initiative becoming the World Land Bridge, as LaRouche has called for decades. Now, on that matter, I'll say that what Sergei Lavrov did give a once a year appraisal. This is where he discusses with press matters of the foreign ministry and his view of what's going on in the world. What he basically characterized is that there is a present disintegration of the rules-based order, which he said that he said, of course, the world order is undergoing a deep-running transformation. It is telling that the West has been actively pushing its narrative about a rules-based order by contrasting it with international law. And then he goes on to say that Western European countries are struggling to come to terms with what is happening in the world, essentially saying, he goes on to say, this time it is not the collective West which writes these rules, but just one of its members. This came as a major shock for Europe. In other words, Europe played around along with the rules-based order, but now the might makes right principle, which Lavrov referred to, is coming as a shock to Europe. But what he does then go on to say is that the greater Eurasian partnership of the CIS, the Eurasian Economic Union, the CSTO, SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, all of these national organizations are creating what he called the Greater Eurasian Partnership and building upon it for what he called would be a pan-continental architecture of equal and indivisible security. And then referred to the civilizational states of China, Iran, the Arab nations, India, that those, thousands of years of culture and history could come together. So that's how Lavrov is viewing it. That is certainly in line with what Lyndon LaRouche promoted, that you need a dialogue of civilizations. This is absolutely at the center of what Helga Tsepp-LaRouche has called for with her 10 principles for a new financial and security architecture for the planet. And that is what is required. I won't cover what Trump has proposed with this Board of Peace. People have probably heard about it. He did say that, or when he was asked about whether this would be a replacement for the UN, he said it might. He said the UN just hasn't been very helpful. I'm a big fan of the UN potential, but it has never lived up to its potential. So I think in all of these matters, those that think that Trump is a 5D chess player or that he needs to be impeached or whatever, the real issue is, what do the American people do to put forward the principles, and not only the principles for international law, but those principles that are coherent with our Declaration of Independence and the foundation of our Constitution. That is what the real issue is natural law versus this bogus rules-based international order, or might makes right. And it's up to us to become citizens not only of our nation, but ultimately of the world, to promote the equal development, or the development of all of the planet. And that is what Diane Sayers' campaign is doing for the U.S. presidency, as a voice for LaRouche, promoting that and recruiting the American people to their true revolutionary heritage that is required at this minute. So stay tuned to the LaRouche Organization. We'll have more